125,000 years ago, the world was in the grip of an ice age. North Africa, once grassland, became a vast desert. And struggling to cope with these changing conditions were the humans who lived there. These people were hunter-gatherers. As Africa dried up, they had to travel farther to find food and drinking water. About 80,000 years ago, according to one theory, many of them left Africa entirely. We conclude this from studying the artifacts and human remains found in East Africa. Archaeologists can tell us in astonishing detail how these people lived. They designed tools with care, understood the seasons, and knew when game animals would return from their seasonal migrations. The decision to leave Africa may have been influenced by looking across the Red Sea, where ample rain had watered the inviting green hills of modern-day Yemen. Once outside of Africa, these travelers split up. Some going north and west, some going east and south. They went their separate ways, never to meet again. Some would head for the Middle East and Europe. Others would continue east, beachcombing their way along the coast of the Indian Ocean, looking for warmer, gentle places to stop, eventually reaching Malaysia and even Australia. The descendants of these first migrators would make journeys of their own, thanks to an improving climate. About 50,000 years ago, the ice age that caused humans to leave Africa came to an end. Monsoon rainfall increased in Arabia and India. Rivers swelled and game spread north. Humans followed the Tigris and Euphrates rivers from the Persian Gulf to the Middle Eastern lands along the Mediterranean Sea, tracing an arc that would become known as the Fertile Crescent. These families in the Fertile Crescent established the first successful human colonies there, more than 10,000 years ago. Here they would learn how to grow crops and keep animals. The rivers provided water to irrigate crops. There were plenty of fish and reeds to build houses and boats. Date palms grew in abundance. Later, the descendants of these first families would build stone structures that would become the cities of Mesopotamia in modern Iraq. The first steps had been taken to the great civilizations that would invent writing, develop warfare, and build empires. For the people who migrated into Asia, North and South America were the final frontiers. According to one theory, hunter-gatherers pursuing woolly mammoths into Siberia eventually came upon the Bering Strait, the narrow channel between Asia and North America. This was the last great journey to populate the world. And like all other migrations, it was dictated by climate. 25,000 years ago, the world was moving into another ice age. The seas began to recede, and out of the Bering Strait emerged a land bridge connecting the two continents. This allowed groups to migrate to North and South America. Around 10,000 years ago, humans had traveled to every corner of the globe, the most incredible and important journey we have ever made.
Prehistoric people had no cities, central governments, or systems of writing. This makes it especially difficult for us to learn about how they lived. Without written records, scientists must depend on other evidence to learn about the prehistoric past. Usually they work with artifacts like tools and pottery. But in 1991, they got a lucky break. Hikers in the Alps stumbled on the body of a man, mummified and frozen, melting out of the ice. But this wasn't the body of one of the hikers who go missing every year in this alpine region. This was a man who had died more than 5,000 years ago. He's the oldest human mummy ever found, a man 5,300 years old. Scientists call him Ötzi, or the Iceman. An arrowhead lodged in the Iceman's back suggested that he was murdered. Ötzi was an immediate archaeological sensation. Research teams eagerly studied both the mummy and his incredibly well-preserved gear.
Next check now.
A copper axe, an unstrung bow with a quiver of arrows, a flint knife, leather shoes, a woven grass cloak, and goatskin leggings. Could these remains tell them who he was, how he lived, and why he died up here in the mountains? Many researchers thought that Ötzi must have been an alpine shepherd, leading goats and sheep to high-altitude pastures in the summer. Shepherds today still herd livestock along the same path where Ötzi was found. If Ötzi was a shepherd, perhaps he was murdered for his sheep. Anthropologists Hans Platzgummer and Sylvia Reinhard and archaeologist Anna Pedrotti decided to test this theory. They started by making an exact duplicate of Ötzi's clothes. When they were done, Hans donned the outfit. He would find out firsthand whether it could have held up to the tough life of an alpine shepherd. As Hans set off up the mountain on foot, Sylvia and Anna took an easier route by helicopter. For Hans, it was a grueling 4,000-foot climb to duplicate the Iceman's journey. From the mountaintop, Sylvia and Anna could see that Hans was having trouble. Modern-day shepherds use shovels to help them climb. Hans resorted to using the Iceman's axe. At last, he arrived exhausted. The three researchers examined the gear to see how it withstood the climb. His shoes were a disaster. They had no traction, and they didn't keep out the water at all. But the cloak felt as warm as a winter jacket. The mysterious unstrung bow became the perfect climbing staff, and the copper axe helped Hans anchor himself on steep sections of the climb. But the poor performance of the shoes is the clincher.
This experiment went very good, because it's the first time that we had the idea that we use the bow and also the axe for climbing up. And also we see that the shoes are totally broken and it's wet inside. And this is the result of the experiment. That's very good.
The poor performance of the shoes indicated that Ötzi probably wasn't a shepherd. Someone wearing shoes like this couldn't make a 4,000-foot mountain climb regularly. But if Ötzi wasn't a shepherd, why was he up here? One possibility is that Ötzi was involved in a fight in the valley below, was badly wounded, and fled up the mountain where he died. In the years ahead, researchers will continue to study Ötzi. They are confident that in time, the Iceman will reveal the story of his life and death.
The Nile is the longest river in the world, flowing more than 4,000 miles through Africa to the Mediterranean Sea. Every summer, the Nile floods because of heavy rainfall in Central Africa. When the floods recede, they leave behind silt, a layer of rich topsoil that transforms the otherwise barren desert into fertile farmland. It was along this river, and because of it, that Egyptian civilization rose and flourished some 5,000 years ago. The Nile was Egypt's most precious resource, but Egyptians had to cooperate to make it work for them. They built complex networks of irrigation ditches to channel the Nile's life-giving waters to their fields. Their need to work together was an important motivator for Egyptians to unite under a single government. Ancient Egypt was made up of two regions, Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. About 3100 BC, Menes, the king of Upper Egypt, united the two regions. Menes and his successors used the Nile to keep the nation united. Government officials traveled up and down the river, keeping watch even over the most distant settlements. When necessary, barges carried armies to trouble spots where they would quickly restore order. Egyptian agriculture also revolved around the Nile. In the earliest days, Egyptians relied solely on the river's natural flooding to irrigate the soil. Later, they developed more sophisticated irrigation systems. They dug a series of ditches to capture the floodwaters. When the floods receded, the water remaining in these shallow basins could be used to grow crops. Another important advance was the development of the shadoof, a mechanical irrigation device that made it easier for farmers to bring water from the river to their fields. With a bucket at one end and a weight at the other, the shadoof works like a seesaw. The bucket is lowered into the Nile. Then the counterweight helps the farmer raise the bucket, which can then be poured into irrigation canals to water the fields. The invention of the shadoof led to a dramatic increase in irrigated land. With these methods, the Egyptians grew a variety of crops. Grain, used to make bread and beer, was the main staple. Other food crops included onions, grapes, dates, figs, and pomegranates. Flax was grown to make clothing. Papyrus, a riverbank reed that can grow 15 feet tall, serves several important uses. Egyptians made a paper-like material by beating papyrus into flat strips and binding them together. Scribes kept records on these papyrus sheets by using hieroglyphics, a system of picture writing. Papyrus was also used to make various kinds of boats, including sailboats and barges. The Nile was Egypt's chief means of transport. Except between close villages, there were no roads. Virtually everything moved by boat. A steady flow of trade goods moved up and down the river. Gold, agricultural produce, animal hides, and other products from sub-Saharan Africa increased the pharaoh's wealth. The wealth that the Nile generated allowed the pharaohs to erect great buildings and monuments. The pyramids of Giza are the largest stone structures ever built. At one time, historians believed that the Egyptians used only slave labor to build the pyramids. But today, they think that some of the laborers were off-season farmers. The Nile's annual floods made farmers eager to earn money during the 3 months that their fields were underwater. And bakers, carpenters, and water carriers helped support the large crews of builders. They built the pyramids using limestone and other materials found along the Nile. The history of ancient Egypt is tied to the Nile. For 5,000 years, the statues of the pharaohs have stood guard over Egypt. They are enduring monuments to the river and the civilization it helped create.
It's 1,000 times longer than any other man-made monument. Started in 221 BC, it was still being built when Columbus sailed to America in 1492, and millions died making it. When it was complete, it was the most elaborate national defense system ever. China's Great Wall is more than just one wall. There are actually many pieces, built and rebuilt by different rulers over the course of 2,000 years. In fact, if you line up all the walls that we know about, it comes to a total of 35,000 miles, almost enough to stretch around the planet twice. The story of the Great Wall is really a story of China itself. Powerful emperors, rival dynasties, and terrifying enemies. It all began with China's first emperor, Shi Huangdi. He ruled the Qin people, for whom China was named. Originally, Shi Huangdi ruled only a small state in Northwest Asia, but he was an ambitious ruler. He built a huge army, and one by one, he conquered the surrounding states. It was said that Shi Huangdi ate up his neighbors as a silkworm devours a leaf. Then, in the 3rd century BC, the new emperor began building the first Great Wall. Shi Huangdi's wall, made of earth sandwiched between wooden planks, adobe bricks, and rocks, begins in modern central China, stretches across deserts, over mountains and plateaus, all the way to the Korean border. All in all, there are more than 4,000 miles of fortification, built in just 12 years. But it took hundreds of thousands of people to do it. So many workers died, it's been called the longest cemetery in the world. So why did Shi Huangdi commit almost the entire country to building a wall? The answer is fear. To the north of China were nomads, tribes of people with no permanent home. They lived harsh, often violent lives. These nomads had only their animals to provide every basic need: food, milk, and wool hides for clothing and their tents. They had to keep moving to find new places for their livestock to graze. In times of need, these tribes would invade Chinese cities, steal their animals, and kill anyone who resisted. The Chinese were terrified of them. The Great Wall was a barrier between what the Chinese considered the civilized world and the barbarians. When Shi Huangdi died in 210 BC, he was succeeded by the Han Dynasty, who built an even greater Great Wall. The Han restored part of the existing wall and extended it another 2,700 miles into the desert, 6,700 miles in all. The Han Wall, like Shi Huangdi's wall, was built to keep out invaders. But it also protected travelers along the famed Silk Road, an ancient trading route that linked China with Persia, India, and the Roman Empire. Caravans of silk, furs, pottery, and plants left China on this road and returned with gold, ivory, and precious stones. Ideas and inventions were also traded between East and West. From China came paper and gunpowder. From the West came religion, early forms of Christianity as well as Buddhism, the dominant religion in China today. But the Silk Road ultimately took Chinese traders toward the dreaded Taklamakan Desert. Local people used to say of this desert, "Go in and you will not come out." Chinese soldiers were assigned to guard the wall near the desert, to provide additional protection to travelers. 2,000-year-old letters have been found out here, written by soldiers who died protecting the Silk Road.
The moon is shining through a sea of clouds. When we are on guard, all we can see is this desolate landscape, devoid of any sign of life. The memory of our home becomes so painful, our exile seems as though it will never end.
The Silk Road made the Han Dynasty and China rich and powerful. China enjoyed years of peace and prosperity. Today, after centuries of neglect, parts of the Great Wall have been restored. It's no longer needed to defend the country, but the world's greatest feat of human engineering is now the defining symbol of the Chinese nation.
In 206 BC, another dynasty emerged in China, a dynasty so powerful that it would build a wall greater than even that of Emperor Qin, the Han Dynasty. Power would be used to usher in an age of trade, ideas, and economic prosperity. The Han Dynasty of China lasted from 206 BC to AD 220. In this time, China became a powerful country due to a policy of expansionism and trade. How did the Han expand their lands and increase trade? Chinese emperors used warriors on horseback to help them win their battles. This, in turn, helped them increase the amount of land they ruled. As the territory of China increased, it spread its cultural influence across Manchuria, Korea, northern Vietnam, Tibet, and Central Asia. Trade soon became China's biggest and most important source of income. Trade was so important that the Great Wall was extended by the powerful Han Dynasty to protect settlers and traders from the Huns, China's nomadic enemies. In total, this Great Wall stretched 6,700 miles, the same distance by plane from New York City to Tokyo, Japan. Why would the Han Dynasty want to build a longer wall? The wall protected and isolated the Chinese Empire and its people. It also protected the empire's interest in trade. A 4,000-mile trade route, later coined the Silk Road, ran parallel to the wall and linked China to the west. Thieves from nomadic tribes often attacked and stole the traders' goods. Guards stationed at the towers along the wall kept watch for thieves. If they got close, the guards would set a signal fire. Smoke meant danger to the traders on the Silk Road. They could see the fires which burnt for 24 hours for 700 miles. China stationed thousands of guards along the wall and went to great lengths to protect their interests in trade. This is because China had a monopoly on silk, controlling the production and price of the material. People living outside China wanted to buy silk. Lightweight and beautiful, silk also retains warmth. During the Han period, Chinese merchants kept the price of silk artificially high to maintain their monopoly. China's rulers made it a crime to divulge information about the production of silk. Exporting silkworm eggs was a crime too, punishable by death. Traders introduced new products from the West into China. Some of these commodities were grapes, figs, cucumbers, and walnuts. They also brought furs from Central Asia, muslin from India, and glass from Rome. Traders or travelers also brought new ideas into China along the Silk Road. Buddhism spread from India into China through traveling missionaries and Buddhist merchants. Buddhism became popular in China because it promised escape from suffering through good work, prayer, and devotion. Buddhism offered hope of eternal happiness, and Buddha was seen as a compassionate God. The little desert oasis of Dunhuang is where travelers on the Silk Road sheltered by the Great Wall rested and prepared for one of the toughest stretches of their journey. Soon they passed through the Jade Gate, the last gateway in the Great Wall, and head for the terrors of the Taklamakan Desert, the worst desert in the world. To help ensure their safe journey, travelers paid local artists to paint Buddhist shrines in the cliffs around Dunhuang. Shrines in which they had their own portraits painted. A reminder to the gods of the help they would require in the next few weeks. So when they left the sheltering walls of Dunhuang, heading for the desert that local people referred to as "go in and you will not come out," they knew they had a little extra spiritual protection on their side. And this is where they finally left the protection of the wall and faced the dangers of the unknown. The Great Wall was the start of a wonderful chain reaction for the Han Dynasty. The wall protected the caravans of the Silk Road. The caravans increased and prospered, and the Han grew wealthy and extended their territories to the north and west of the Great Wall itself. Traders and travelers, merchants and missionaries traveled the Silk Road, sharing religious ideas and goods and services for thousands of years. Buddhism is only one example of how the effects of the Silk Road still exist today.
Deep underground lies the resting place of China's first historical dynasty, the Shang. More than 3,000 years after the Shang ruled China, archaeologists and historians are still discovering the secrets and legends of this ancient civilization. Around 1650 BC, the Shang, a Chinese people, gained control of an area in northern China. From there, leaders established the Shang civilization as a collection of city-states, which laid the foundation for 600 years of Shang rule. Until the end of the 19th century, there was no evidence that the Shang even existed. They lived only in myth and legend. But after a chance discovery in 1899, the Shang began to emerge from the shadows. In Peking, a scholar named Wang Yuzhong lay ill. Beside his bed were animal bones that were traditionally ground up and used as medicine. His friend, Yu Tiyong, noticed strange markings on the bone's surface. Instead of using them, the two scholars began to study them. They had discovered the earliest form of writing ever recorded. After visiting local pharmacies, they found out that the bones had come from a site at a town now called Anyang. Archaeologists began digging at Anyang in 1928 and are still digging today. When they uncovered the last capital city of the Shang dynasty, clues began to reveal who the Shang were and what life in their civilization was like. The inscribed oracle bones revealed that the Shang practiced many traditional rituals and believed strongly in the power of their ancestors' spirits. Shang priests would carve questions into animal bones and tortoise shells, asking about the weather, the harvest, and upcoming military campaigns. Then, they applied heat to the bones or shells, which produced cracks along the surfaces. The priests interpreted the cracks as answers from the gods or messages from their ancestors. As the dig at Anyang continued, archaeologists made a significant discovery in 1975, a huge burial site that gave the best indication yet about life in the Shang dynasty.
The discovery of tomb number 5 at Anyang might be compared to the discovery of the tomb of King Tutankhamun in Egypt that contained riches beyond archaeological belief. It had been unlooted, and so for the first time, archaeologists had a sense of the richness that the royal tombs of Shang held. Hundreds and hundreds of bronze vessels, as well as large quantities of jades, ivory objects, and other wonderful works of art.
The tombs also held evidence of wars and human sacrifices. The Shang often went to war with neighboring clans, using war chariots that were discovered buried along with important Shang leaders. Human remains found with the chariots revealed that the Shang sacrificed hundreds of people when a king died. They buried objects they thought would be needed in the afterlife, including their precious bronze vessels, jade pieces, and a private army. Today, archaeologists continue their attempts to unravel the mysteries of the Shang. They are looking for the very first capital city, called Great City Shang, in the hope of discovering more about their origins and the ancestors they honored.
As we find the city and excavate the city, we're hoping that we'll be able to find ancestral temples and maybe ancestral tablets that would help clarify where Shang came from and the genealogy of Shang and how this great Bronze Age civilization in North China developed and laid the foundation for a lot of the features in Chinese civilization that we see.
While the search continues for the Shang dynasty's beginning, the story of its end can be found in the records and oracle bones that have been discovered. These bones reveal that rival clans were threatening to overthrow the Shang. The Shang fell in 1027 BC, never to rise again. But the quest to learn more about them and their origin continues.
The haunting ruins of Petra lie in the desert of southern Jordan, halfway between the Dead Sea to the north and the ancient Red Sea port of Aqaba to the south. The city is enclosed by sandstone cliffs, and as soon as you enter, you see what makes Petra unique: hundreds of elaborate monuments carved right out of the rose-red canyon walls. These remarkable sculptures are haunted by legend. Petra's most intricately carved tomb, the Khazna, or Pharaoh's treasury, features a great urn that supposedly contained an Egyptian pharaoh's gold. The urn bears the scars of bullets fired by treasure seekers in the vain hope that the gold would come tumbling down. It was once thought that Petra was little more than a cemetery, a place where nomadic tribes came to bury their dead. But now archaeologists have unearthed evidence that this was a lively city. This temple was part of a sacred complex as big as a football field, located next to Petra's main street. Stores lined the main street, along with several other imposing temples and a huge amphitheater. The The city was approached from the east through a narrow, high-walled gorge known as the Sick. This mile-long cleft through the mountain would have made Petra difficult for outsiders to attack. But it also served another function, as a channel for ceramic pipes that fed water to the city from rock-cut cisterns, containers that caught rainwater, located on the canyon rim. It was an impressive plumbing system that provided running water to a population that may have reached 30,000 people. But the question remains, who would have chosen to live in this desolate valley? The answer lies in the magnificent rock-cut tombs that now define the city. The tombs are inscribed in the language of an ancient Arab tribe called the Nabateans. The one thing archaeologists can agree on is that Nabateans built Petra sometime during the 4th century BC. At Petra, the Nabateans cornered the market in one of the most valuable commodities in the ancient world, frankincense, the pungent, sweet-smelling gum of this tree, which flourishes in remote foothills of present-day Oman and Saudi Arabia. The burning incense was believed to prevent infection, promote health, and bring joy to the gods. Petra was in a perfect position to control the spice trade. Camel trains began at ports in the southern Arabian Peninsula and trekked across the desert through Petra, heading for Mediterranean outlets at Alexandria and Antioch. In a few generations, an arid gorge became a thriving metropolis, an international crossroads of commerce, architecture, and religion. Like most of the Middle East, Petra was eventually absorbed into the Roman Empire in AD 106. As trade routes changed, the city declined in importance, and ultimately it was devastated by earthquakes. But for more than 5 centuries, the Nabateans had flourished in their arid canyon, forging their own distinctive civilization from the desert sands of Arabia. Their legacy, these haunting ruins, has inspired countless visitors to the place one scholar called the Rose-Red City, half as old as time.
In the 3rd century BC, the Emperor Asoka used military power to become one of the greatest rulers of ancient India. For nearly 40 years, he ruled the vast Mauryan Empire. Through war and conquest, he brought nearly all of India under a single ruler for the first time. Asoka made the capital city of Pataliputra, now known as Patna, the nucleus of his empire. Under Asoka, India prospered, art flourished, and the culture of the Mauryan Empire ushered in the first great flowering of Indian civilization. Asoka was known as a great military strategist, and his army was extremely well organized. It had a strong chain of command, and even detailed written manuals to guide the soldiers. His soldiers were well paid and well trained. They spent much of their time training and preparing for battle. But Asoka had an even more formidable weapon. His army used elephants to win many victories in battle. With their very large bodies, elephants are able to do things during combat that are too difficult or dangerous for other forces, such as marching in front, destroying ramparts, gates, and towers, trampling the enemy's army, and causing terror. Other Indian armies during this time also used some elephants in combat, but Asoka had 9,000 of them, and they trained right alongside his soldiers. The infantry, cavalry, chariots, and elephants trained outside the city every day at sunrise, except on days of special astrological significance. Asoka led his last military campaign against the rich kingdom of Kalinga, located on the Bay of Bengal. Kalinga controlled the country's southern trade routes. This was Asoka's last remaining competition in India. In 261 BC, Asoka set out with his army for the assault on Kalinga. A well-planned system of roads crossed the empire and helped soldiers and civilians alike get around. Over the years, Asoka had lined this primitive highway with ponds and wells. Without them, his traveling armies would have perished within days. A general took the lead, then the emperor himself, flanked by his bodyguards. Behind him marched thousands of elephants, horses, oxen, and soldiers. After them came the part-time militia and craftsmen, then the companies of allies and mercenaries. Behind them, finally, rolled thousands of wagons and beasts of burden, loaded with equipment and food for the enormous army. Engineers and laborers forged ahead, repairing boats and bridges and preparing fords before the army arrived. Sometimes the elephants formed a living bridge. After marching hundreds of miles, the Mauryan army entered the kingdom of Kalinga. At the front line stood Asoka's elite, the mounted archers. Each war elephant carried 3 fighting men. 2 shot from the side and 1 from behind. A 4th man guided the animal. Against so many war elephants, the Kalingans were outmatched. Some got tossed in the air, others crushed underfoot. The rest panicked and ran. With its army beaten, Kalinga soon surrendered. After the battle, Emperor Asoka was shocked to see the suffering and carnage he had caused. Asoka was so full of remorse that he renounced the use of violence and embraced Buddhism. The religion of Buddhism had started in Asoka's homeland of Magadha, a region in the modern-day states of Bihar and Jharkhand. The Buddha himself used the Magadhi dialect of Sanskrit. Asoka had boulders and pillars across India inscribed with his pious declarations. He asserted his belief in ahimsa, or nonviolence. One of these inscriptions read, "The beloved of the gods, Asoka, conquered Kalinga. 150,000 people were deported, 100,000 killed, and many times that perished. The slaughter, death, and deportation of the people is extremely grievous. The beloved of the gods wishes that all beings should be unharmed, self-controlled, calm in mind, and gentle." Asoka had numerous Buddhist monasteries built and made Buddhism the state religion. And he sent Buddhist missionaries throughout India and as far away as Syria, Egypt, and Greece. Asoka also urged tolerance of all faiths, regulated the slaughter of animals, and softened the harsh laws of his predecessors. When he died around 232 BC, his empire collapsed into chaotic fighting between rivals. But Asoka had led one of India's greatest cultural and religious revolutions. And although in India, Buddhism would eventually become only a minor religion, Asoka's support helped the religion spread and survive in other regions of the world, where it lives on today.